The opening race of 2025 delivered chaos from the very start, as unpredictable weather threw teams off balance even before the lights went out. But even before the rain came into play, the midfield drivers made their presence known. Big names, like Yuki Tsunoda, Alex Albon, Pierre Gasly, and Carlos Sainz, turned heads with their impressive performances in qualifying, shaking up the usual pecking order. Once the race began, the tricky conditions made direct comparisons between teams difficult. However, Williams and Ricciardo showcased impressive speed, adding pressure on the leading teams ahead of this weekend's Chinese Grand Prix. The stakes are even higher now, as a fresh technical directive could impact performance, especially for some of the top contenders. As previously discussed, the FIA has been tightening its grip on a growing trend in the sport, what many are calling the mini DRS effect. The issue gained traction when McLaren tested the limits of rear-wing regulations during last season's race in Baku. Over the winter break, the FIA decided that stricter tests and enforcement were necessary. The concern? Certain teams had found clever ways to pass FIA's static tests, which check for wing flexing, while still reaping the benefits of flexible aerodynamics on the track. Initially, the FIA had planned to roll out the new technical directive at the Spanish Grand Prix in round 9. However, officials took a proactive step last weekend in Australia by installing high-tech cameras to closely monitor rear-wing movement. What they saw was enough to fast-track the changes, meaning the revised regulations will now come into effect for the Chinese Grand Prix. And that's just the beginning. More restrictions and testing will follow at the third round in Japan, with the ultimate goal of eliminating any potential loopholes by the end of the year. The early enforcement of this new directive raises one crucial question: which teams will suffer the most? According to an analysis by Italian motorsport experts, 4 major teams have been flagged for gaining an edge through flexible rear wings: Ferrari, McLaren, Alpine, and Haas. Identifying the exact extent to which these teams stretched the regulations remains a challenge. However, there's no doubt that Red Bull has been vocal about the need to clamp down on potential loopholes. Ever since preseason testing, they've been pushing for action against what they believe to be an unfair advantage. With the FIA now taking a firm stance, Red Bull views this as a major win. The reigning champions, who were once the masters of flexible wings under previous regulations, have admitted that their rivals have gained more in this area with the current generation of cars. Over the winter, Red Bull's technical director, Pierre Wache, acknowledged that while Red Bull once had the upper hand in aerodynamic balance, other teams had now caught up using their own flexi-wing solutions. McLaren, Mercedes, and Ferrari have all aggressively pursued flexible wing designs, leading to a shift in the competitive landscape. Wache admitted that Red Bull previously had other methods to maintain car balance, but their rivals had now found their own way to achieve the same result. We had certain elements that allowed us to fine-tune the balance of the car. We used this approach for 2 years, but now others have introduced front-wing deflection to do the same. And in that regard, they've moved ahead of us, he explained. From Red Bull's perspective, any regulation that forces teams to stiffen their wings is a step in the right direction. One team member even stated, "The less flexibility there is, the better it is for us." However, while Red Bull is encouraged by the FIA's quick action, it remains to be seen how much of an impact these changes will actually have in Shanghai. The full effect may take a few races to become clear, especially with another set of front-wing restrictions coming in Spain. For years, Formula One teams have been aware that the FIA has the power to tighten bodywork deflection tests whenever suspicions arise. This flexibility in rule enforcement has been used multiple times in the past, but in most cases, teams are given ample warning before adjustments take place. However, this time, things are moving at an unprecedented speed. By enforcing stricter rear-wing load tests at the Chinese Grand Prix with just 5 days' notice, the FIA has made it clear that it saw enough evidence to justify an immediate response. This urgency stems from their findings at the Australian Grand Prix, where additional onboard cameras were used to monitor wing movement. Along with extensive garage inspections, the data suggested that teams had been pushing the limits beyond what the governing body deemed acceptable. During preseason testing in Bahrain, footage revealed that multiple teams were using a significant amount of aerodynamic flexibility in the rear wing. This triggered the FIA's deeper investigation, leading to increased scrutiny in Australia. With new high-definition cameras installed, teams were closely monitored throughout the weekend, and additional load tests were carried out on specific cars to verify compliance. The scrutiny didn't stop there. After qualifying in Melbourne, the FIA conducted detailed checks on several cars, including Max Verstappen's Red Bull, George Russell's Mercedes, and Carlos Sainz's Williams. These inspections focused on both front and rear wing compliance. Even after the race, Lando Norris's McLaren, winner of the Australian Grand Prix, was subjected to multiple rear wing deflection tests to assess how much flexibility was present under different conditions. Although all tested cars passed these checks, the FIA was still not fully convinced. Their decision to revise the regulations for the next race confirms that what they observed on track raised enough concerns to warrant immediate action. The FIA has long maintained that just because a wing passes standard garage load tests, it doesn't necessarily mean it complies with all regulations during actual racing conditions. Their updated Technical Directive 34 explicitly states that wings designed to change structural behavior based on secondary factors, such as temperature or aerodynamic load, will be considered illegal. This means that even if a wing remains within the legal limits during static testing, any unintended flexing on the track could now result in disqualification. The FIA's swift action following the Australian Grand Prix indicates that they were deeply concerned about what they saw. The updated rule reduces the allowable slot gap movement tolerance from 2 mm to 0.75 mm for the Chinese Grand Prix, with a further tightening to 0.5 mm expected in the near future. This forces teams to either reinforce their rear wings or adopt designs that comply with the revised regulations. Interestingly, this crackdown does not appear to be aimed at any single team, but rather at eliminating what has become a widespread practice. While every team will publicly claim that these adjustments won't affect their performance, the reality is that no one invests in flexible aerodynamics without expecting a competitive advantage. The benefits of a flexible rear wing extend beyond just reducing drag on the straights. A team that successfully optimizes this element can run higher downforce at the rear, improving cornering speeds and overall tire management. In a season where car balance is more crucial than ever, small aerodynamic tweaks can have a significant impact. Last weekend in Melbourne, for example, tire management in the final sector played a pivotal role, with drivers who maintained better grip gaining crucial time over their rivals. Now, all eyes will be on Shanghai to see if the pecking order shifts. After these changes, Red Bull in particular will be paying close attention, eager to see whether teams that previously relied on flexible wings suffer a noticeable drop in performance. While the team wasn't able to force an immediate stop to flexi front wings earlier in the season, they will be satisfied that any rear wing-related tricks are now off the table ahead of the second race of the year. However, the bigger question remains: will this be enough to significantly change the competitive landscape? While some teams may struggle to adapt, others may already have contingency plans in place. The impact of these regulatory tweaks might not be fully understood until the next few races, especially with further changes coming for the Spanish Grand Prix. One thing is certain: Formula One's ongoing battle over aerodynamic flexibility is far from over. Teams will continue searching for new ways to gain an advantage, and the FIA will remain on high alert, ready to intervene whenever necessary. The next few races could provide crucial insights into who has truly mastered the new regulations and who will have to go back to the drawing board. Red Bull's stance on the matter is clear. They believe the stricter regulations will work in their favor. The team has long argued that certain rivals were gaining more from flexible wings than they ever did under the current rule set. Technical director Pierre Wachet acknowledged that while Red Bull had previously excelled in finding aerodynamic balance without relying on wing flexibility, other teams had closed the gap by leveraging flexing components. Now, with tighter regulations in place, the playing field could shift once again. The FIA's decision to revise the tests so suddenly hints at the level of concern within the governing body. By implementing changes with just 5 days' notice before the Chinese Grand Prix, the message is clear. Any potential gray areas in the regulations will be eliminated sooner rather than later. But even with these restrictions, there are still questions about whether all teams will be fully compliant right away, or if further clarifications will be needed in future races. From a competitive standpoint, the upcoming weekend in Shanghai will be an important one. If certain teams suddenly struggle with straight-line speed or overall handling, it could confirm suspicions that they were relying on rear-wing flexibility more than they admitted. This would be a massive boost for Red Bull, which believes that reducing flexibility across the grid will help restore the advantage they've recently lost. At the same time, teams like McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes will be looking to minimize any negative impact. Some engineers have suggested that while the FIA's changes will certainly affect setups, they may not drastically alter the running order in the short term. Instead, teams might be able to make quick adjustments and recover some of their lost performance through other means. One of the biggest factors in this equation is how teams choose to balance their aerodynamic setups. A more rigid rear wing may improve high-speed stability, but it could also lead to increased tire wear over a long stint. Meanwhile, a less aggressive approach might maintain tire life but reduce top-end speed. Finding the perfect compromise will be key, especially on tracks with a mix of long straights and technical corners like Shanghai. For fans, this is shaping up to be a fascinating storyline to follow throughout the season. The FIA's crackdown on flexible wings is just the latest chapter in Formula One's never-ending push to regulate aerodynamics, while teams continuously look for innovative ways to gain an edge. With further changes coming for the Spanish Grand Prix, the true impact of these new rules might not be fully understood until later in the year. One thing is for sure: every team will be analyzing their competitors closely, looking for any signs of unexpected struggles or sudden improvements. The next few races could reveal who has adapted the best and who will be forced to rethink their strategies as the season progresses. As the Formula One grid prepares for the Chinese Grand Prix, the pressure is mounting on teams to adjust to the FIA's stricter rear-wing regulations. While some might claim that these changes won't make a major difference, history suggests otherwise. Small aerodynamic tweaks can have a ripple effect across the entire setup, influencing everything from tire management to cornering speeds and overall race strategy. Red Bull, a team that once dominated the flexi-wing era, now finds itself in an unfamiliar position, pushing for tighter enforcement rather than exploiting loopholes. Their belief that stiffer wings will work in their favor could be tested this weekend as they look to maintain their early season momentum. Meanwhile, teams like McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes will be working behind the scenes to ensure they don't lose any ground due to these adjustments. But even with these new restrictions, the reality is that Formula One engineers are some of the most creative minds in motorsport. The battle over aerodynamic flexibility won't simply end with this directive. Teams will continue to find ways to push the limits of the regulations, just as they always have. The FIA's ability to stay ahead of these developments will be crucial in ensuring a fair playing field for the rest of the season. The upcoming race in Shanghai will be the first real test of whether these rule changes will shake up the competitive order or simply serve as a minor speed bump for top teams. If certain cars suddenly struggle to maintain their pace, it will validate the FIA's concerns that some were gaining an unfair advantage. But if the pecking order remains largely the same, it could suggest that teams had already prepared for these changes in advance. One thing is certain: This won't be the last time the FIA steps in to tighten regulations. With further checks coming ahead of the Spanish Grand Prix, teams must remain vigilant, ready to adapt at a moment's notice. The balance of power in Formula One is constantly shifting, and this latest development is just another chapter in the ongoing battle between innovation and regulation. As the lights go out in Shanghai, all eyes will be on the track to see who has truly mastered these changes, and who will be left scrambling for answers. This is the beauty of Formula One, a sport where engineering brilliance meets relentless competition, and where every millisecond counts.